I actually think Jack's going to stay on the sidelines.
Yeah, do Nate instead of Jack.
Oh, okay. All right, well, I brought Jack in. Jack can stay on mute and conceal his camera, and I'll bring Nate in as well.
I actually think Jack's going to stay on the sidelines.
Yeah, do Nate instead of Jack.
There you go. All right, John, I think we're all set to start.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's Wednesday, February 24th. This is the Town Council Virtual Finance Committee meeting. We have some guest presentations today with us. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The first order of business is to take attendance. And Colette, would you call the roll?
I will. Councillor Anderson?
Here.
Councillor Gleistein?
Here.
Councillor Clucci?
Here. Great. So we're all in attendance. The second and item number 3 actually is the approval of minutes from the prior 2 meetings, January 27th and February 17th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. And Councillor Clucci?
Yes.
Councillor Anderson?
Yes.
Councillor Gleistein?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Great. And now we get to jump into the heart of the meeting, which is a presentation from Avesta Housing with regards to a CEA request for senior affordable housing development at the site of the former public safety building. And I think we've got Nate Howes here. Did I pronounce your name right?
You did. You did.
Okay, great. Who's going to walk us through it? Tom, I don't know if you want to introduce this.
Simply that pleased that the Finance Committee is taking some time to maybe spend a little more time than the council would otherwise to really understand the request, to get into some of the details. I would also note, given the fact that we do have a newly minted TIF CEA policy, though it's not directly on point for this kind of project, I did encourage Nate to at least go through the exercise of self-scoring on the matrix. I think there may be some value and thought-provoking aspect to that exercise. So that's material provided to you as well. I guess lastly, we did provide in the packet some kind of general background information on senior affordable housing that's happened in town. And pleased to talk about that as you wish as well.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, I wanted to say we're scheduled to go to 6, but I'm going to need to get off earlier than 6. So I just want to let you know that.
Okay. What time do you need to check out?
Well, I have another meeting at 6. And so I just need maybe 20 minutes in between the 2 meetings. I'd prefer a half hour, but I'll live with 20 minutes. So I think Tom will probably be at the same 2 meetings. So he might appreciate it, a little break in between. So just thank you.
I will try to respect that. Absolutely. So Nate, I'm going to let you introduce the project, and I'm going to apologize in advance that we may fumble our way through this a little bit because we don't see these all that frequently. And I think there's a desire for at least us as a finance committee to try to come up with a standard way to look at them or evaluate them. And you're going to hopefully help us get a little closer to that.
I'm happy to be the guinea pig.
Thank you.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Nate Howes. I'm a development officer with Avesta Housing. You might remember me from my presentation the other night, but I thought it was prudent to introduce myself again and this request for a credit enhancement agreement. First, a little bit about myself. I've been with Avesta now for around 2 years. Before Avesta Housing, I was actually at Maine Housing. I started there as a multifamily underwriter and ended my tenure as the tax credit administrator. In my role as tax credit administrator, I actually ran the scoring process for the tax credit awards in 2018 and Maine Housing's Housing Trust Fund program. So I have a very good idea of how Maine Housing programs function and what reviewers look for in a successful application. And I've brought that knowledge to this project, and it underpins my request for this credit enhancement agreement. So now I want to address a topic that came up in the last workshop that we had, that there might be too much senior housing under development in Scarborough, or this perception that there might be a glut of senior housing. So Tom, to that end, Tom has provided you with some figures for your review, and they're in the packet, and we can dig into those numbers later in the meeting if you would like. I will say that as the QAP and Maine Housing financing is currently written, it does currently incentivize the development of senior housing. It is by no means an explicit bias. It's much more implicit and definitely not intentional. To get a competitive score for a workforce housing development, the majority of units greater than 50% of the total must be larger than 2 bedrooms. This makes development more difficult from a financial and zoning perspective. There are fewer sites and resources for the larger projects. In addition, from a practical standpoint, as you get larger units, the tax credit rents simply don't cover the cost of actually constructing units. It's a bit of a paradox. In essence, the amount that you can borrow on each subsequent larger unit is smaller relative to the cost of constructing them. So meanwhile, senior housing with a focus on 1-bedroom units is much more feasible under these programs. Maine Housing implicitly incentivizes the development of senior housing by offering an additional 6 points for additional accessible units beyond those required by law. Everyone knows about aging in place initiatives and all that. Maine Housing wants seniors to be able to live in these homes, for the rest of their lives, and that's a great policy. So they have they incentivize type A units, which is a type of accessible unit with a lot of removable features, so that as a senior goes from walking to maybe wheelchair to walker, they can still stay in their unit. So we can readily include these accessible features in our development much more than we could construct a larger 2 or 3 bedroom unit. The cost difference from a square footage basis is pretty stark. These 6 points for accessibility for senior housing offset the 6 points Maine Housing offers workforce housing for larger units. It should be said that not all workforce housing can or should be developments with larger units. Sometimes what municipalities really want is 1-bedroom units in a downtown location for young working professionals. However, such proposals don't score under Maine Housing's financing, and they're not funded through the competitive 9% program, the program we want to use. I actually know of 2 such developments that did not score in the 2019 QAP round because they were focused on 1-bedroom workforce housing, one in Portland and one in Lewiston. I know I just provided quite a bit of information, but I felt it was necessary to talk about your concerns from the last meeting and explain the scoring dynamics when you're dealing with Maine Housing financing. So this request for a credit enhancement agreement is made in light of the information I just provided. We are proposing senior housing because not only is it desperately needed in Maine, but also because it is most competitive for Maine Housing financing. Maine Housing regularly cites the need for at least 10,000 units of senior housing across the state. And we know from regional market studies of Greater Portland that demand in the area is high. To therefore make our application as competitive as possible, while also serving Maine seniors, we are requesting a 75% credit enhancement agreement for a period of 20 years. This request will receive 3 points under the current QAP, Qualified Allocation Plan, a page of which has been submitted for reference, and you can see the table in that page. In sum, we hope you consider our request for this credit enhancement agreement that should push our application from just below the score of projects funded last round to the cutoff point for last year's winning application. So that's the background on the credit enhancement agreement. And now I'm happy to go into the details of the project. I think many of you were there for that last workshop. Just let me know what direction you guys would like to go in next.
John or Betsy, any?
Yeah.
Well, I have a quick question based on one thing you just said.
Sure.
So you're going under the 9% program.
Mhm.
So what's the feasibility of your project if you can't get under the 9%? Because there's a 4% program as well. Is that
There is
right?
an active 4% program, and we would work with Maine Housing to determine if our project was eligible for that program based on the financing. As of right now, it works under the 9%. The 4% is more tricky. We would need potentially, we have another source of funds that we would have to go after from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston.
Okay. So you just have to find more people to invest in all of that for
Yeah.
funds. Okay. All right. I didn't have a thought yet, John, on how to move forward, but that was just one question I had on
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a
Okay.
great
Yeah.
question. It's a great
Yeah.
question. We always try to find a way forward for all of our projects. Right now, the most ready path forward for this project is this fall's 9% program. Good question.
I was
So-
just gonna say it would be helpful, John, if maybe again, just a quick 3 to 4 minute refresher on the project. Again, we all did attend the meeting, but there might be some people from the public too who are watching, so it'll be good to just revisit the project.
Do you guys want me to share my screen so we can look at it?
Yeah, do you have the ability?
I do. Oh, well, I might. I don't know.
You should.
Okay,
Awesome.
let's do it. Okay. So I will go back one slide to show you guys the site as it currently is. So this is the site as it currently is. It's surface parking and the former fire and police. And then if we go to the new site, this is what was presented at Monday night's planning board meeting, the site plan and subdivision request. You can see here we have about over 70 parking spaces for the development. Our development is 31 units, 31 bedrooms, and then 1 efficiency unit, so 31 total. We've sized our parking requirements and ADA parking spaces based on a 0.7 calculator. We do an annual survey at Avesta where we survey all of our properties to see how much parking is actually utilized. At most of our senior properties, the parking is at or below a 0.7. I will say from personal experience, at 2 senior properties I'm working at, the actual ratio is about 0.5, so half a space per every unit. We're very confident in the 0.7 number, so 0.7 spaces per unit. And we're happy with the amount of parking that would be provided under this plan. The vision for this site is one where seniors can age in place and have ready access to community amenities. One thing that Maine Housing prioritizes, and that we really all should prioritize when we're developing senior housing, is bringing resources to the seniors. So to that end, there is a gym, a community gym that is going into this building, which we hope to engage with the owner on competitive pricing. We've had some preliminary conversations about that. And hopefully we will get a grocery store in this area, though I know that's still up for discussion right now. But just those two venues themselves and this walkability that you can see, these pavers, I mean, this is just a great campus for a senior population to feel like, you know, not only are you a bit secluded, not only are you surrounded by greenery, you have this bocce court here or outdoor grass area, but it's just a great community feel with amenities right at your fingertips. Any questions on that? And the floor plan, here's a floor plan of our first floor. Can you all see that pretty clearly? In all of our developments, we have, you know, office space, trash room or trash areas, a lobby area. In this case, we are putting a community room in the existing existing former police station. We are going to lease a community room there. Our community rooms are typically not only used by residents, but we typically work with local organizations to allow them to be used by members of the public or other organizations. Really, they just have to book an appointment to use it. We have existing relationships at 2 of our properties in Portland, 409 Cumberland Avenue, and one at Unity at Bayside, where we have our community rooms regularly used by local community organizations for various meetings. So that's the development as a whole. Is there anything else you'd like to see about it?
So Nate, I had the opportunity to tour the Southgate facility, which is further down Route 1 in Scarborough. It's more of a multi-generational complex, but I was impressed that you had a number of amenities and services that you provide for the residents. Can you speak a little bit to that? I'm not as familiar with what you do for seniors, but.
Yes. No, well, so we have it's a bit of a separate division, but it's still the Avesta Homeownership Center. Now, so seniors, our target demographic here is seniors who are on a fixed income or looking to downsize from their homes. But the Home Ownership Center, in addition to offering home ownership counseling, also offers financial counseling and fraud prevention services, which are critical to seniors. And so we offer those classes. We're offering them virtually now, but one thing we would do is host those in a community room on the site. On other senior developments, we frequently partnered with Maine Health in the past for foot care clinics, flu shot clinics, telehealth services. Trying to think of other things. In Farmington, we are going to partner with we have a project in Farmington that is on hold right now, but we are trying to partner with this Gold Leaf. It's a senior learning initiative. So via the University of Farmington, which is pretty cool. Seniors get to take discounted classes through the university. So we always look for local community partners and stakeholders to bring to our seniors. Those are just a few examples I can think of on the top of my head.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, go ahead.
So on that note, just to follow up on that, so do you guys take care of the trash on your properties or?
Yeah, it's different in every town. We try to aggregate our contracts for efficiency, but yes, we take care of our own trash.
Okay, and then do you have like a shuttle service for the
Yes.
55 and over? How does
Another
that work?
another great question. So getting back to the QAP and what I said earlier about points and incentivizing developments, Maine Housing has a category called Smart Growth, which is a category of 15 points, and this site is perfect for that. So the first part is what I was talking about earlier with the amenities, where you get 5 points for being within walking distance of activities of daily living. So this site is perfect for that category. The second 10 points are on-demand transportation, which you just mentioned, Betsy, and public transportation. There's a bus stop around a half mile down the road here, the Zoom bus, I think it's called, or at least it was called. So getting back to your question, Betsy, we partner frequently with RTP to provide on-demand transportation services for our residents. RTP would likely serve this project. In more rural areas, we partnered with the Opportunity Alliance. There is a company out of Conway that we've partnered with up there for a couple of our projects in the Freiburg area. So yes, that is something that we are going to provide for this site.
And then do you have an activities director? And then do you on some regular basis, do you check the properties and the maintenance of the properties internally?
Yep. We have a whole maintenance team here at Avesta, and we have resident service coordinators per project. So we assign a resident service coordinator, and they're the first line of interaction with our residents, and they will elevate questions or concerns up the chain of command via our property managers. And we have a full maintenance staff. So there are regional maintenance directors, and then below them, there are property maintenance technicians, and then training maintenance technicians. We have a pretty robust management and maintenance department.
Yeah. So at one of the Jocelyn project, they were explaining how they actually physically enter the apartments once a year to see if a person isn't aging in place properly. That's, something's not working for that person. And is that something that you guys do as well?
I don't know. I'd have to follow up on that.
Okay.
But that is a smart strategy.
Just curious. So you will not own the land where the building is going to be, is that right?
We have an option for purchase, I believe. I would have to check on that.
So is that 50-50 that you typically do, or you guys own the land up Route 1, right? Avesta bought that
Yes.
property. So is this typical that you don't own the land, or 50-50?
I believe we own the land here. We had talked about doing a lease structure at one time, but because of the program we're using, you have to have ownership in the land in order for it for the tax credits. So now that I'm rethinking it over, we do own this land, and yes, we do own Southgate.
So the developer sold you just that corner?
Yes.
Okay. And the parking, or?
Yeah, and the parking and the community room.
And what was the cost? What was the cost of that purchase?
$500,000.
Okay, thanks.
Nate, the finances for these deals is complicated, and you
It is.
be very well informed on it. Can you talk us through the different sources of funds that you'll go after for this type of project?
Absolutely. So I alluded to it earlier when I was speaking with Betsy, but another big source for us is the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. They have an affordable housing program which provides direct subsidy, so direct grants to the project, as well as a below market mortgage. If we aren't able to get that, or if we don't need it for the project, then we'll use Maine Housing financing and subsidy. So Maine Housing offers subsidy as well. It's typically larger in amount per project than the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston. But if you take Maine Housing subsidy, you must take their debt, which makes sense. Maine Housing's debt, while interest only, is at 5.5%. So the interest rate differential is significant. Another source of funds that we've used in the past, but which I haven't contemplated here, is the Cumberland County Home Consortium. So Mary Davis out of Portland, the Portland Development Office runs that program. I have some of that money on another project, but I'm familiar with that program. And then there really aren't many pots of money. I've affordable housing in Maine. There are maybe 5 or 6 allocators of resources. The largest being Maine Housing, of course. The others being individual towns. Scarborough is one of the few that I know of that actually has a housing committee that makes recommendations on financing. The other towns I can think of are Auburn and Lewiston, but their allocations come from the Fed Home Program, which is out of HUD. And then Portland has a home program. South Portland doesn't. I think there are like 3 or 4 different cities in the state that have home programs. So, and then if you're not, so just to recap, there's Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston, Maine Housing, of course. Cumberland County Home. If you're in Lewiston or Auburn, you have those homes. Portland Home, and then in this case, there's the Scarborough Housing Alliance, which is a unique situation. Haven't really seen that before. If you're not doing those financing sources, the only other one that we've been successful in bringing to the table was the Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta, actually. We've done that with 2 projects now. But there are these federal home loan banks that are scattered around the site, and you usually can't score with them if you're not in their immediate area. But Atlanta's scoring has been such that we've been able to fund. In fact, the Southgate project received Federal Home Loan Bank of Atlanta funds. So we've been able, those are pretty much all the resources you can bring to bear to these projects.
So where's the CEA play in? Is that it's a way of reducing your operating costs?
It's a debt calculation. So the CEA allows us to reduce operating costs and therefore borrow more money.
Okay.
And can you remind me, this is for 60%? What's the income threshold?
60% AMI, which for this area is $42,000 per year for one person, which is the demographic that we would be looking at.
And then are you required to, or are you reserving any for Section 8?
We can, so we're not reserving any. No, we're not setting aside any units for Section 8, but law states that you must not prohibit Section 8 tenants in the building under 50.
Okay.
And you could give priority to Scarborough residents?
So that is also something that is not technically allowed. Well, no, it's just not allowed under Fair Housing Act. But what we do in that case, I mean, that is a question we get all the time from towns. Practically speaking, this will rent first to Scarborough tenants. Our marketing operation is pretty robust, and we're going to market it to Scarborough tenants first. Can we put a preference there for Scarborough tenants? No. Can we put a restriction for Scarborough tenants? No, we can't do that. But our focus will be on getting Scarborough residents via an aggressive marketing campaign. And we've been pretty successful on that in another project we just did in Norway, where we really aggressive with Fox School redevelopment. We really aggressively marketed it to the Norway region, and we got a lot of locals. In fact, we got one of our first tenants was a former a maintenance woman who worked at the old school. So we have a proud history of marketing to local communities.
Okay.
Now, so you mentioned all those financing sources. And one thing we learned from the last one of these that we went through is then sometimes there's an LLC formed where investors will that also be a part of this, or?
Yes, there will be. Yes. So essentially we have not yet formed the, yeah, so I don't mind. I love talking about this stuff. This is, I find this part of it, very interesting. I'm going to stop the share now. We are a nonprofit. So in order for the tax credits to flow through to this project, we form a limited partnership. One of our subsidiaries becomes the general partner, and we are 100% stakeholder in the general partner. And then the limited partner is an investor. So the tax credits flow up to the investor, and the capital flows down to the project.
So it sounds like you've done a ton of work on this. I know, the last when we looked at these, we got some pretty complex financial statements, pro forma, that showed what they expected to spend, operating costs, where they expected to get financing. They did that on the model of the of the 9% model. So is that something you already have or?
Yeah, I'm happy to provide that after this meeting. Sure.
Okay, yeah, because you had made a specific number for the next meeting I'm in was 6,500 per unit with the request from the Housing Alliance. So I'm like, well, there has to be some math down there for you to, you came up with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay.
No, there's always math done.
Okay, yeah, great.
Yeah, no, I can definitely provide that. And I will, I'm sure the Housing Alliance, yeah, Betsy and Tom were on the same meeting after this. I'm sure the Housing Alliance will request that as well. So I will send those out.
Okay, great. So yeah, I did want to make a couple of comments, John, if you want to, if we're talking about the form they filled out.
Go ahead.
So I thought you did a great job, Nate.
No, thanks.
And then the further part of the document, whoever I think in our town put together what we already have, the inventory and all that. I thought that person did a great job. I'm not sure who pulled that together at the bottom of our agenda packet, but really excellent job on that. Put all the TIFs in one place and the CEAs in one place. So that's hugely helpful. So I think, that was definitely a tool developed for economic development. So you could tell that when you were doing it. So, some of the questions about infrastructure, I'd probably rate myself differently because I think, and maybe we didn't explain it enough, but we have developers who come in and say, we're going to put in this much of your sewer and we need this much back, so I didn't see really what you guys were doing as changing infrastructure, but it did kind of, you are like, we put only historical for viewing, are you enhancing a historical, but you are doing a piece of former town property. So there's something in there that maybe we want to tweak that question. And then, I think if we do a questionnaire like this for affordable housing, it's going to include all of the types of questions that we were going through today, like what kind of services are provided and, things like that. So I think we've been able to hit those, but it would be almost like what you get scored on with the state. What does that, we would almost maybe take some of that criteria and, or at least incorporate it in and say, okay, let's take a look at, what you're getting back, from the state and what you're going for. So
I think that would be,
they're looking for the same things I would, in a way, that the town would be looking for.
I think that's very wise, Betsy. And it actually is, interestingly, something that Portland just started doing when they were allocating their home money. Was they were asking, it was an honor system, but they were asking what your score was under the tax credit application, which I think is prudent from a resources allocation standpoint. They want to know if they're going to allocate resources to a project that won or a project that isn't going to win. So if the project is scoring, if the last winner was a 74 and this project is scoring a 62, are you going to give $200,000 to this project? Probably no. But if you have a project that's 73 and $200,000 gets it to a 74, then maybe.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that's, really kind of a direction, because I think as we're learning more about this, we're learning, how the different players is not the right word, but how different groups that do this operate and, what they bring to the table and, their success, like you say, of being able to get this financing. It's funny because I followed up on the Jocelyn one, and they did not qualify under the 9%, but they're going to get the 4%, and they got a grant for $650,000, I think, from that bank you were talking about.
Yes, they did. Oh, good for them.
So it all kind of starts flowing together, but it's good to understand the different components to it. Yeah.
Definitely.
Can you fill some of the blanks for us? How many points are you going for? Where are you targeting with this proposal?
I am targeting 7. I am risk averse. I'm targeting 74, which is what this TIF would get us to. Last year, actually, the lowest scoring 9% was a 74, which was actually our project in Portland. So it's in that light that I am trying to get to that 74.
You think there's more competition this year?
I do. Affordable housing development, just like market housing development, I would assume, is all about not only serving the resources available to you, but serving the competition. And so I keep pretty abreast of who's out there. And I've seen more activity this year than I have seen in the past 2 years. And you just get like little whiffs of activity. Like I'm sure there are developers who have a Google alert for me and they know that I was in front of the Scarborough Housing Alliance or the workshop. So, I've seen a lot of that this year.
Yeah, and I think it behooves us, in the town to learn how it works well because, it is complex. And then, to partner with the right people, I think, to make sure that these things come to fruition and remain really viable structures. And, because while we would only be a small part really of it, money wise, we don't want a white elephant,
Sure.
in town either. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So now your information is quite helpful,
That's good.
and it's all public. So that's kind of the nice thing, as opposed to with a developer. Sometimes you're trying to do some of these things. A lot of their information is proprietary or private,
Yeah.
and this is all public and information that we can dig
Yep.
into. So that's great.
And I'm happy to share it. So
What's your success rate, Nate?
with applications to main housing,
Yeah.
so with the 9%, Avesta's my personal one or Avesta's?
It doesn't matter.
Avesta's is very, very robust. So in 2018, they had 3 projects funded, which was, I think, the most for any organization. In 2019, it was one for, it was one for 3. We sometimes submit projects that might not score, but just in case. So we knew we had one really strong application that year, and that one scored and won, and then won this past year. So really our goal, we always make sure we have at least one that is in that range from the last year. And this year that was Valley Street in Portland. My personal success rate, I've always submitted, this would be my second from this side of the equation. I submitted another one, a project called Hillside in Gorham. I submitted under 9%, but that was one of the ones where we wanted to get on their wait list. Main Housing maintains a wait list, and we wanted to get on their wait list for a 4% program. And just this past December, they moved us off the wait list and got us into that 4% program. So that's the strategy there. So the 4%, I mean, the competition part of it, if a project works as a 4%, there's a massive incentive for the developer to just go the 4% route. You're not wondering if you're going to get funded or not. You're not waiting around to find out in November, December. So it's not, I mean, this is just speaking for myself. I can't imagine if you have a project that works as a 4%, I can't imagine you waiting around for the 9%, given the certainty of it working under one way.
But speaking of wait lists, does Avesta maintain a wait list for this type of housing, or because this is still in the pipeline, you don't have, is this the only one you have in the pipeline, or for all the other ones that you have? And would it be possible to tell us how many people from Scarborough are on the wait list? I don't know if you can tell us that, but.
I don't know if I can tell you that either, but I don't know. So it's an easy answer for me. We have wait lists at multiple properties. We don't have a wait list yet for this one, but we would have one. Usually it's around 50 to 75% completion. We would go out and start doing our marketing. So for reference, we have a project on Brighton Avenue, 977 Brighton Avenue. It's called Wessex Woods. We just got our CO, certificate of occupancy, on that one. But before we had even gotten our certificate of occupancy, before there was even siding up on the building, we have 400 inquiries for 40 spaces. So it's people just, and we hadn't even advertised it. So people just see these things go up and they reach out, and we do maintain those wait lists at 50% or 75%.
What would some of the milestones be? So we're now sitting in February 2021.
Mm-hmm.
When do you envision, if things go well, this project actually being able to accept residents?
Let's see. So we would find out about our award in November of 2021. We would then proceed to a construction loan closing, which would take approximately 6 months. You apply to Main Housing with concept plans and elevations, and then you work with your architect to draft 50% plans and 90% plans. which usually takes at least 3 to 4 months. And then there's a closing time frame, which is, we'd like to see it as 30 days, but it's usually 2 months. So 6 months is usually the turnaround. So let's just, be generous and say December is when we start the design development. So that takes us to June. Construction start July, lease up 2023.
So I had a question on the, maybe Tom knows, or on the, so you just bought that little corner of the property. Was that a subdivisable? So now you're the owner of it. And so it's due property tax, or there won't be property tax on that corner anymore, or how was that transaction happen? Because maybe I missed it, but we weren't aware of that as far as I know.
We don't own it yet. We have an option agreement to purchase.
Okay.
So all taxes and everything would flow through Jack and Tim, I believe.
Do you have any details on that, Tam? Was that a subdividable piece of property, if that's the right terminology, Tom, or?
It certainly is. I don't know the particulars of it. The property has not been for many, many years, decades, tax producing, and hasn't been since ownership passed either. Value is as of April 1st of any given year. And of course, the town owned it last April 1st. So there's really no tax loss because there was never any generated. But certainly, so long as the lot meets all of the minimum lot size, so on and so forth, certainly a subdivision is legal and can be done, and I guess will be done.
I seem to recall this used to be a residential lot. Didn't the fire and police department purchase it?
There was, but I suspect what they're acquiring is slightly larger than what that residential lot was. I don't know, but my gut tells me the size of the footprint and associated circulation and parking is much larger than that residential lot alone.
Nate, you're a wealth of information.
Yeah.
A little bit more. Some of the concerns with the council is the initial vision for this property was workforce housing, right? Which got us all excited because we want to try to bring some youth back to town.
I understand.
Can you talk through but at the same time, we know that our population is skewed towards the older end of the spectrum, but can you talk through what you've seen for need in Scarborough for this type of housing?
Oh yeah, well, let me just talk in general terms because I don't have the market study up right now, but for similar, so there's something in market analysis called the capture rate, which is where they take your amount of units and you divide that by, or you divide the total population that would meet the criteria by the total number of units. And capture rates for the Portland market are like 1% or 2%, which implies like a need of like 3,000. So this is considered the greater Portland market. So when I was referencing market studies earlier or market analysis, that's what we're looking at. Scarborough in particular, I could not tell you how many households would meet the requirement right now, but that is census data that you can actually, it's public record that you can actually look up if you're interested. I can tell you that the need is great. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Or okay.
I have a follow-up to that. So when you guys kind of made the switch from workforce housing to senior affordable housing, were there other market alternatives that were considered? And if so, what were they and why did you decide to go this route?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to, I can't speak to the thinking. I think this is potentially more of a Jack question, and I can't speak to that. But I can say that the housing that we are putting on the site, my hope would be that, like I said, I think I said at the workshop, my hope would be that our residents would come from downsizing seniors, singles and couples who were potentially selling their homes. So my hope would be that there would be an indirect effect by allowing young people who are outpriced in Portland to potentially move to Scarborough. I know that what Jack and Tim envisioned for this site was ultimately this vision of a closed, not a closed community campus, but something nestled in where you had all of your activities together. I know that COVID really changed Jack's calculus on what was feasible from a workforce perspective. And I think his thinking was, well, this site, we have this grocery potentially here, we have a potential gym, and we have a potential bank maybe someday. this would be great for seniors who don't want to go far, who might not have a car. This still works, I think is the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, John, I can say from past conversations, really from the first time I talked to Jack about this concept, is that he really does this because he believes in it, and that the margins are very thin. I mean, there's a reason that others are not doing this. His initial vision was to do it without subsidy. And not surprisingly, the margins are incredibly thin. I do think some of the experiences of COVID and the uncertainty associated has made those margins maybe even thinner, or added a level of risk that I think it was, from a business point of view, I think it's important to keep in mind that what's being proposed as a mixed-use development is remarkably similar to what the original vision. There's certainly a difference in terms of the demographic and how it's funded, but I think all those things came together.
So Nate, did you approach the developers, or did the developers approach you?
We were approached by the developers. We were working on them with another project in Portland, an RFP there. They were impressed with our mission and, our design standards and, how we approach the business. And I'd like to think we were their first thought when they were thinking about changing the population for the site.
I can tell you that we met several times with Dana Topman, who was the executive director of Avesta, with a number of different interested parties before we sold. So Dana, for certain, I think Avesta as an organization was aware of this property and always very interested in it for the same reasons Nate's just elaborated on.
I will say that from a neighbor perspective, this demographic is probably much more appealing than the workforce demographic. I can't imagine they're going to bug anybody. Did you attend the neighborhood meeting?
I did. There were concerns. There were concerns about the design of the building, which we are working to address, and there were concerns about the nature of low-income housing. This is something that we hear in pretty much every community we go to, and that's okay. We understand people have concerns, but you are correct. This is a 55 plus population. I don't think there's going to be any really loud music or any kind of ruckus behavior. I think it's just people looking to relax and enjoy their retirement. It's definitely an easier. I would think it would be an easier demographic from an age perspective.
Well, and Betsy, you attended many of the early neighborhood meetings before the sale was actually consummated, or around the same time. As I recall, much of the concern then related to location of the building and maybe even design of the building, but also just increased traffic and just kind of the impact on the neighborhood. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, the traffic was huge because of where people were going to enter and exit, and the residents behind there already have a very difficult time coming and going for their jobs.
Sure.
So that was definitely, and I know the developer at the time started really taking that into account with like working up the lot, because if they were to have more traffic that went back in the neighborhood and then have to get out on Black Point and go left, I mean, none of that works. Like, I don't know, we were talking about a light down there, but there's no plan for a light down there. So yeah, that's definitely one of the concerns.
Yeah, and I think much of the input is still contemplated in the site plan that they've started to talk to the planning board about. It does strike me though, given Avesta's experience with senior housing and appreciation for how many residents actually have vehicles and so on and so forth, this is likely to have less of an impact than the previous residential use is or was going to have.
And I'm really interested, from a town benefit of how we might be able to benefit from this talk of a community space, because when I went back and looked at the record about even selling this property at all, we had one resident speak up and say, she was hoping we would not sell this property. It's a long-term resident of Scarborough, former town councilor, former just do everything. She just recently passed away. I had the privilege of serving with her on the senior advisory committee, and it was her passion, as well as many of us in town, for a senior center somewhere as a gathering point. So I guess I'm very interested in this concept of this community room. I don't know that would meet our concept of a senior center, but if there's
Yeah.
some kind of win-win for the town of Scarborough and our seniors in general, I'm definitely open to hearing that.
It's not going to be as large as a senior center would be, as I'm thinking you're contemplating, but I believe the space is between 700 to 800 square feet, and it would have a couple windows there. So a nice, useful, small event space where we can all get back in rooms together.
Kitchen?
I don't think there's a kitchenette, but there is a bathroom, a shared bathroom on the floor.
So Nate,
Gathering space alone, would be welcomed. We simply don't have enough to meet the need.
Yeah, we do that all the
Nate-
time. Yeah, go ahead.
Nate, in Avesta's portfolio today,
Mhm.
like what percentage of the portfolio is getting a CEA or some sort of subsidy from the towns that they're in?
That's also a good question. I don't know if I could give you an answer off the top of my head, but let me think about our current projects and which have credit enhancement agreements. So I have 3 right now. I have one in Gray, one in Gorham, and then this one. This is the only request for a credit enhancement agreement out of my 3. We have 2 going up in South Portland that both have credit enhancements agreements. We have one going up in Portland that has one. We have one going up in Conway, New Hampshire, actually, that doesn't. We have one going up in Farmington that doesn't. We have one going up in Lewiston that does. It's kind of split 50-50.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what's the decision point, or when do you make the decision that these ones require CEAs and these ones don't? And maybe just specifically to your portfolio, because you mentioned you have 2 that aren't and one that is.
Entirely project specific. Entirely the design of the project, how much debt it can already support, how much construction costs are estimated to be. It's just a project by project calculation, really. Location by location.
So what happens if we don't give you guys a CEA? What's plan B, or what happens then, or what's the impact to the project?
Well, can't support enough debt to not only close a financing gap, but then again, we're not competitive in the 9% round either. The bigger issue is, being non-competitive is one thing. Closing the financial gap that's a project systemic issue. This credit enhancement agreements end up supporting something like, I don't know the exact figure on this one, but I want to say it's like 1.5 million in debt from Maine Housing that this credit enhancement agreement would support or allow us to support. And that's just a huge gap that we probably couldn't cobble together the resources from the other pots of money I've been talking about.
So is that kind of the difference between the cost of the land? Because you're moving to a very expensive spot, the town of Scarborough, in the prime region for, the most valuable property. So is that kind of what's the difference maker?
It can be, and it might be in this case. I'd have to look at the numbers, but the construction cost market has been exploding recently as well. So we're having to, 5 years ago, we were seeing projects at Maine Housing that were $160, $150 per square foot. Now, if you're applying below 200, you're going to have a hard time when you get to closing. You're going to have a lot of value engineering, which is basically just stripping out the features that you like from the project. So in this budget, I built in a hedge against that. I think I'm at like 210, 215 per square foot, just knowing that once everything comes roaring back from the pandemic, I think costs are going to accelerate even more. They had gone up 25% in the past 3 years. I kind of did a presentation in Freeport in February of 2020, right before COVID, and construction costs had increased at that point by around 25% over the past 2.5, 3 years. I think that the pandemic, I'm not really an expert on this, but from what I've looked at, the pandemic has arrested that gain. So they flatlined at their new norm. I fully expect them to continue their upward trajectory later this year, really.
Mhm.
What do you
So without the
anticipate-
CEA, how does that impact the scope of the project? Like what,
Oh, it just can't get done. That's all.
it just wouldn't move forward?
Yeah.
So Nate, you had given us some documents that showed that the rough guess of assessed value for this is about 1.65 million. I imagine it's going to cost quite a bit more than that to build, and the delta is because we're restricting the rent
Mhm.
for these units. How much is your overall cost for the project?
7 million. Can you give me 1 second?
Yeah.
So I will say briefly, I do love appraisals. I will say that your assessor is going to come up with a value that is somewhere in between the 1.6 and the cost to construct. So the cost to construct is never really used from a bank perspective for a loan to value calculation. Then again, banks aren't really keen on just using the restricted value because it's so low. So typically they'll also request a as market value. So the assessor is going to come and look at somewhere in between those values. I doubt they'll go for the as construct value, although I don't want to speak for the assessor. But let me just pull this up. Sorry, my computer's slow when I'm on Zoom.
Well, while you're doing that, I think I have a question, maybe more for Tom, Betsy, and John around, town policy, if we have one at all, on our approach to senior affordable housing and how we leverage CEAs. Because I think one of the things I noticed when I look at the most recent projects that have been approved, I think in the spreadsheet, it looks like all of them are getting some sort of benefit from either a TIF or a CEA. So is that a policy objective somewhere that we've aligned, that when it comes to senior affordable housing as a town, TIFs and CEAs are, part of the approach we take when it comes to these types of projects? Or is that just the trend we're seeing based on some of these more recent projects? Because hearing from Nate, it sounds like there are some projects that move forward in other towns without CEAs, and there are some that do. So I'm just trying to understand a little bit more what our town's policy is around this.
There's no policy I'm aware of. I think the best guidance is in the 2006 comprehensive plan that has aspirational kind of performance targets around affordable housing. I don't recall that it necessarily differentiates between, senior affordable and workforce necessarily. And generally it's, on a 5-year average, 10% of housing stock is considered affordable as the performance target. And we've actually had some pretty good experience. Kind of our most recent 5 years, we've seen quite a bit of projects come forward. I think there's also a recognition in the comprehensive plan that to do so, there may be some level of local subsidy required to assist. It's short of a policy, but I think it's a recognition that that's part of the equation.
I think there are a couple call outs in there, Tom, for we should evaluate opportunities to donate land for these types of projects, which I think we may have done with Southgate and maybe Carpenter Court.
Yeah, but I think it's just a general recognition that a level of subsidy, whether it's low cost or gifted land or a CEA or support through our Affordable Housing Initiative Fund or a combination of all of those things, I think there's a recognition that to do these projects, in many cases, it requires a subsidy.
So let me answer John's question first. John, 8.2 million is the total development cost. So getting back to what I was saying, I like to try to project what the taxes will be. And so, like I said, I think, so if this project were market rate housing, you have potentially higher rents. So, and therefore you have the way appraisers value property, residential rental property, is an income approach to value. So as your income goes up with a similar capitalization rate, you end up with a higher value. So my hypothetical, as if this was market, is like 3.7 million. As restricted, as you said, it's 1.6, 1.7 million. So I think the assessor will likely come down somewhere in between, but harder to know.
Thank you.
Sure.
I wanted to elaborate a little bit on your last question too. So there's kind of two sides to this equation, right? We have Pepper Shores development that we approved an expansion, I think about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. A part of that, they have to pay in lieu fees. So they have to actually pay into a fund that is earmarked for these types of projects. And the Housing Alliance kind of directs where those funds can be best used to help us achieve our affordable housing targets, which, like Tom says, about 10% of the new units coming on the market is what the aspirational goal for the former comprehensive plan was. And I think it's similar in this one too. So there's it's kind of all of those pieces together is what help you bridge the gap between 1.7 million, what somebody who built this on their own would be able to justify it, and the 8.2 million that it actually costs to build it. So you're going to take some money from Piper Shores and Beacon and other developments who have been paying into that in lieu fund to help offset some of the costs.
What's that? As a brief aside, what's interesting about pilots is that they aren't. So a lot of sometimes people ask, or towns ask, can you do a pilot program instead of a credit enhancement agreement program? And the thing about pilots is they're not. The investors look at pilots as not being secure enough long term, and they're worried about the town revoking the pilot year to year, and they think the same way about abatements. So in the tax credit program, the only viable tax relief that towns can really offer is the credit enhancement agreement. Just an aside.
And typically, would you be doing these under an affordable housing TIF? I mean, we keep doing these under an economic development TIF, which is
this would be my first time under an economic development TIF, but it's not unheard of. Sometimes there are downtown TIFs that are used for affordable housing as well, that run through DECD. So it's definitely not unheard of, but the affordable housing TIF was something that I saw much more of at Maine Housing. I'd say for every maybe 5 affordable housing TIFs, there was 1 economic. Maybe it's worse. Maybe it's lower than 20%, maybe 10%.
So presumably on the affordable housing TIFs, most towns, and maybe you don't know this, but most towns would not shelter any of the proceeds coming from the affordable housing TIFs, because the idea of the economic development TIF is that we can shelter some of the revenue, but we're sheltering revenue. So in other words, it's a little bit of a multiplier, right? So if we give you a 75% CEA, on top of that, we're sheltering 3% because of the TIF that you're going into.
Tom, you might know more about this than I do, but my understanding is that you can still shelter under affordable housing TIFs, especially for the calculation for like school children and such.
Yeah, you certainly can, though I think the options for additional sheltering at the election of the municipality is far more limited. I do know there's some legislation pending in this next legislative session to broaden that and to allow more uses. Betsy, what I would say is we certainly could move forward with creating an affordable housing TIF. I mean, that would require us to remove this parcel from the existing TIF and create a new one. And I guess I feel the same way as I did with Jocelyn Place, because it's within an existing TIF district. It seems like a lot of work. And so long as the decisions we've previously made with respect to the 3%, that we think those are still valid reasons that we've chosen, I continue to advocate to work within the confines of these existing TIF and its restrictions.
Right.
directives.
Yeah. I've been trying to, find the difference. I think, part of it is just the, the idea of the economic development TIF was to develop an economic engine that helped, stabilize property taxes of people in Scarborough. And so with commercial development type development.
Well, I mean, it's 1,000 acres in footprint. So undoubtedly, there's going to be things that happen within that geography that, don't meet that. But you're right. That's the overall goal for sure.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully that starts bouncing back. So that looked to be well on target before COVID, but now, not as promising at this moment, but.
Go ahead, John.
I have more of a numbers question. And I'm hoping, John, maybe you already did the numbers and have the answer, because I tried to do it myself and I don't know if I did it right. But when I look at the TIF CEA totals 2020 through 2021 that was in the packet,
Mhm.
you know, there's a bottom line number. I'm assuming that the 1.4 million means that's how much, you know, taxes we're providing back to developers to support the CEAs and the TIFs. So if we were to approve this CEA, what would that impact be to the bottom line on an annual basis? Is it like, what is that number that we would be giving back to this project?
Yeah, I do. About 20,000 a year. Is what
Okay,
I-
that's, yay, then I did it right. That's what I got too.
is the
okay.
estimate. Yeah.
Which is really just like, if you look at that total, it's really only like 1.3% increase from that total line, which is pretty small. And this would be the smallest project, it seems, on that list that we have.
And John, see, you mentioned 10% of new development. So what is the denominator in that? Do we have a denominator for new development to know if we're hitting the 10%, we're not hitting the 10%? Do we have an inventory like?
So I'm going to share my screen, and I may regret it later, but a couple hours before this meeting, I was trying to answer that question. And I took the information that's in the packet that Tom or town staff assembled, and some information that I have from the assessing database, just looking at how many units have we added each year? And this is by year of construction, which is not necessarily the same as the year that was permitted or planned for. But if you look in the last decade, I'm estimating another 300 units for 2020. I don't know. We'll find out in April. And then I'm estimating going forward what we'll do in the next decade. But anyways, these aren't too far off for the 2010 to 2020 anyways. And it looks like 5% of the units that were added in that decade were affordable. And 36 of them were senior and 69 were family. And then if you look at the ones that we already have in the queue for this decade, we've got Bessie and the Uplands that are well underway, that are probably going to be finished this year. With 79 units, everything in the queue is senior. Jocelyn Place, I'm tagging as being done in 2023. Uplands and this one would be another 70 units the following year. I don't know when Uplands 2 is going to happen. And honestly, I don't know when this one would happen either. So these are kind of just projections, but so far we're looking pretty good for the next decade. It's closer to 7%. And there's still plenty of time to finish out the decade. But I'd say we fell short by quite a bit last decade. We're off to a really good start this decade. And that's, this is, I mentioned before that I'm trying to figure out how we're going to evaluate these things to make sure we don't need 90% of our inventory to be affordable. This falls a little bit short in that I think there's some places that there may be some other developments that provide affordable housing that doesn't meet the technical, subsidized definition of affordable, but it still is affordable to residents that live here, that I'd like to try to incorporate that. But it looks like we're falling a little short of the 10%, but we're looking good for the next couple of years.
I think the difference, John, is that these projects, you're assured affordability by way of covenant or other restriction.
Exactly.
Whereas the other ones, and I would tend to agree that if they're affordable today, they will tend to track affordable to market going forward, but there's no guarantee in that regard.
Yeah.
These are restricted for a period of 45 years under Maine Housing's covenants.
And they will usually re-up, right, at the end?
We will usually do a refinance event at year 15 or year 30, and then re-syndicate it as a 4% tax credit, that's just kind of standard industry practice. So for practical terms, this thing is affordable in perpetuity.
And I won't ask this question right, Nate, but how much capital reinvestment do you put into existing properties? Upgrades, new bathrooms, new kitchens, new roofs, because all of that makes the property more valuable to our town.
We do a lot of work. We first try to, on the front end, I'm going to get a bit of a longer answer, but on the front end, we have a design standards template that we provide all of our contractors that the architect put in the spec book. We pride ourselves in energy efficiency. So buildings that have really, really high R value envelopes, great makeup air, heating systems, all of that, so that we are in the best shape possible in year 15, so that maybe we don't have to do as much work. I can tell you that we had we acquired a bunch of public housing, not public housing, projects that we just did a conventional refinance with. It was like 10 projects, almost 200 units of housing. And we just ended up doing like $30,000 per unit in rehab work. That wasn't my department, that was our asset management department. But we take really good care of our properties. And on the front end, we've started, like I said, with our design standards. That's like a new thing in the past 7 years, 5 to 7 years. So on the front end, we are actively creating projects that are ready for the next 20, 30 years. We're not in the game for a 15-year project. We don't want to end up at year 15, broken cabinets, broken heating systems. We've replaced the boilers twice. Like we build really high quality stuff.
In fact, one of the values, it strikes me, of going through Maine Housing is their insistence up front for you to demonstrate the financial and the administrative and management capacity to care for the property over its useful life.
Correct.
So you have to demonstrate that all as part of the application before they fund. And if you look at the list that John showed, the majority of those units are all were built and being managed by kind of professional affordable housing developers, as opposed to people, wanting to do the right thing and dabble in this. It's a really unique and difficult animal, particularly over time, to do it and do it well.
Agreed.
Seems like you have a pretty well-oiled machine, actually. Where are your risk spots? 'Cause it seems like everybody's kind of guaranteed to make a little bit, but not a lot. There's a lot of nonprofits that kind of play into it.
What was the question? Where my risk?
Yeah, do you ever see a project go bad?
Oh, yeah, we see projects go forward, not all the time, but I'd say it happens 1 out of every 10. And we had projects, I won't disclose. It wasn't in the immediate area, but zoning issue happens. Some neighbors, basically, I don't know the particulars because it wasn't my project, but they basically made sure it couldn't happen. And we lost quite a bit on that deal, because we have to invest all these funds up front. There's no pre-development line of credit. So Vesta takes our own funds and we fund the work that needs to get done ahead of time. And then at construction loan closing is when we're reimbursed. So there is risk to us and projects do fail. As to foreclosure, there's like no risk in the tax credit world. I think the foreclosure rate is actually below 1%. Basically, once these things are baked, they're baked. They operate well. There's very little default risk. You have so many eyes on these transactions. Once they're put together, they really are secure. But on the front end, there's risk to us.
So on the front end, so it's right now like you're investing soft costs in engineering and so on and so forth that
Right.
you'll only recoup at closing, which is 18 months still down the road.
Correct.
So I'm viewing this as an appropriation request, right? And that's kind of why it falls under Finance Committee purview. I'm assuming there's going to be two components. One is the CEA, which I think you've provided really good information about, actually, in sufficient detail. The other side is a potential grant funding from the Housing Alliance. And I understand that you're going to be going before them in an hour?
Yeah.
An hour?
Less than an hour.
So I think a couple of takeaways for the Finance Committee will be how do we want to package this? I think we need to understand the Affordable Housing Alliance perspective before we could move anything forward. And I don't know if it makes sense to get an update from the Housing Alliance here about where we stand relative to goals and targets and whether this fits into their mission. I guess I'm looking for thoughts from John or Betsy about where you think our next step should be.
Well, I will say that Betsy requested a pro forma, so I know I have to provide that for you guys and probably for the Housing Alliance. So I have homework.
Yeah, my expectation for the Housing Alliance is that Nate is going to introduce himself and the project. They're really hearing about it for the first time, I think, in large part. should there be any, a reception from them, which I expect there will be, there is a formal application that needs to be completed. And I suspect additional backup information like the performer would be part of that. So I don't expect that they'll be taking any action tonight, but there's a number of different parallel paths that Nate wants to pursue for obvious reasons to keep this on the critical path that he needs.
Who on the council is the liaison to the Housing Alliance? I don't remember. Betsy? There she is. Yeah. So is this something Betsy can help bridge the gap between the two? Because again, I think it would be interesting to understand what's progressing on that side.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to know what they know and what they understand. And I don't mean this in any way. And I'm not sure. I think they sometimes just look at the overall value of the project and not so much necessarily the details. I think some of that has fallen more to the council and now kind of new, going to the finance committee. So I think they'll be looking, I could be wrong. I mean, Tom can speak to this, but I think they'll be looking at the factors of how it fits into the community and the comp plan and things like that. That's my perception, but I certainly could be wrong. And I haven't been on it very long. And, they have a long history before of using this fund. I think the fund, it's, we did fund some for the most recent one, the Jocelyn Place. And then, I don't know, I mean, the requests don't come along all that often for funding out of that fund right now. So.
No, they don't. And Betsy, I think that's a fair characterization. They typically, or historically, I'll say, have not dug deep into the financial details. I think they do try to keep more of a higher level policy direction. I will say they are keenly interested and have been very involved in kind of the in lieu fee aspect and the creation of this fund. So they're very pleased to see, and I think I can characterize their position, though everyone would like, private developers to actually build affordable housing units. The reality is not all are capable, and frankly, we don't want them to because they won't do a good job of managing them. And the notion is these in lieu fees can be leveraged and produce multiples more units under proper management and oversight for 45 years. So it's a long-winded way of saying this is their program. They created the requirements of it. And so I think they're always very receptive to see a quality developer advancing significant affordable units in town. So I would fully expect you'll get a favorable view initially and then ultimately as well from the Alliance.
Right. And then I think it's kind of more up to the council to dig into the details of the financial aspects of it.
Yeah, there's this recommendation only. Council controls whether the grant is actually awarded or not. So
you're going to present later on today. If it goes well, you'll do the formal application. And that application is where you would request grant funding, or how does that come out of it?
Yeah, effectively, he's expressing an intention of doing so. I would view it submitting the formal application is the trigger point. Yes. Okay.
So I guess, and this is just me, what I'd like to do is we've got a lot of great numbers information for the CEA side of the equation. Once we know what the numbers are for the grant side, let's tie it together and maybe vet it a little bit as a committee before it goes to council. I think I think would be appropriate.
That makes perfect sense to me. I totally understand. You guys want to see the performa? No, that's fine.
Okay. Excellent.
Not a problem.
Nate, I learned a lot today, Nate. Thank you very much for coming. And for being
thank you
about this stuff. So
I mean, your straight answers were fantastic. So I appreciate it. Okay, so committee.
So I'll be back, and I think you can. Is it Liam? Is he still around? Can he take me off presentation mode?
I think you can.
He'll kick you out.
Okay.
Or you can just get out.
Oh, no, I want to stay for public comment or.
Oh, fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.
Thanks.
Okay. Are we ready to move past this one, or do you want any closing comments or final words? You're happy? Okay, excellent. I guess I will open it up. It's a little early, but I know that we've only got about 15 minutes left. Is there anybody from the public that would like to comment on anything on the agenda, but really specifically the Investa CA that we just went over? And I'm not seeing anybody with their hand up. Okay. So I think we may, the next item on the agenda was to talk about long-term planning. And the next two items are actually standing agenda items that I think we're gonna probably have in front of us for the bulk of the year. And that's long-term planning and then financial reporting. Long-term planning, the last meeting, we had a presentation from Tom and we had some good discussion around it. We kind of left with, we need to figure out what the purpose, right? If we're gonna go through that effort, why are we doing it? And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on, how we might identify what the purpose of doing long-term planning is or why we would want to do it.
I would just say, I feel like we need to spend more time on it just to have that type of dialogue. I think trying to do it in 14 minutes is probably not going to do it justice. So I would think, I agree though. I think that's the first step is we all need to agree on what the purpose, the scope, that type of thing, the goal. And, maybe that's just something we need to prepare for the next meeting to come with is all of us having our own views on what it is. Cause I think it could be different. And I think once we bring all those pieces together, we might come together on a common purpose and focus. So I feel like there's maybe some homework that each of us need to do just to prepare for the next meeting that we have to kind of address maybe some 3 or 4 questions that we need to make sure we each take the time to think a little bit about.
I just want to get a little clarification because we have kind of interchangeably talked about long range planning as well as regular financial updates at the council level and what that would look like. So are we encompassing both of those or is that?
Well, I have them 2 separate agenda items, but I think they're related, but not terribly so.
Okay, so which one did we want to focus on first?
Are you talking right now?
Well, I don't know. We can decide this later, but I guess my one thought was we got pretty far with the tax comp sheet. I don't know if we want to finish that off. I felt like Tom and Ruth put work into that and coming up with something do we want to say, is this something we could adopt for something just to follow up on the past work that got done or, say no, so I just appreciate the work they put into that. And it's, something I don't want to see lost. So I didn't know if maybe we could take that up just to particularly say how we would use that tool that they have developed. And is that something we could take out to council? It's a longer range tool. So I don't see that we'd be doing it monthly. So I don't think it applies to that, but that's why I was asking the question.
Yeah, sure. I think I like John's suggestion. Next meeting, maybe we come with, well, why do we want to do long-term planning? And maybe we have a bit of a discussion around that. It may circle back to the work that's already been done, but I think we need to kind of take a little step back to just make sure that I don't want to waste anybody's time, I guess is what I'm saying. I want to make sure that there's going to be a real reason for why we want to look ahead. And I think there is, but I think we need to articulate it too.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I just feel like we've asked Tom to deliver and he's delivered several things and we just haven't really we haven't taken it to fruition as a committee. That's just my personal opinion. I do feel like he's delivered things and we're just not really replying to them and making them actionable. That's kind of what I feel like.
This on the agenda every week.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom.
Just one thought I'd leave you with. To me, I think the most important slice of this forward look is related to capital. The predictability on the operating side is pretty good, frankly. Where things get challenging is, pouring on top of this a huge heavy debt load all of a sudden, and what sort of impact that has. We could look at what those needs are, and we certainly know what our amortization, what our costs are over the next 30 years. I think that level of analysis could be hugely helpful, frankly. The other one that gets is challenging, I think, when we're looking forward is the variability of our new value, frankly, and that's just always challenged, even looking a year ahead, much less 2, 3, or 5. So the capital piece is really where I think the most of the volatility is, and most of the forward look needs to be focused on, frankly.
I think so, because I think what we had kind of discussed in the past was that we do have the capital plan. I always want to make sure people know we have a 5-year capital plan that encompasses all of the things, but it's not a town-wide, and it doesn't take into account some of the big projects. Like if the school hits here, what does this do to the dump trucks we need and the fire trucks we need? And on the school, they need the same type of thing.
Yep.
So I think it's like a systemic town-wide capital asset program, which we actually have had something like that in the past. I remember that, Tom, a document you sent us.
Oh, we have it pretty well developed on the town side. It did not incorporate school needs, and frankly, there continue to be big questions as to what their needs are. Leadership had some conversation around that very issue this week, and there's frankly no more clarity in terms of what that is and when it's coming. Sooner than later, but order of magnitude is really matters for sure.
Tom, I think you came really close to actually that's exactly what I was thinking in terms of why we do long-term planning. It's so that we can slot these large capital items so that it doesn't have an impact or a measurable impact on the tax rate, so we can plan for them. And then the other side of it is understanding where our growth is happening and how that's going to also play a role in the tax rate. So I think you came pretty close right there to kind of getting at the purpose, or a purpose that I think I would agree with. So we'll revisit it next meeting.
Okay.
And it might be quick. We might be able to just hone in on that. I'll try to write that down now. The next item was financial reporting. And this is just something that, Ruth, when will we get the third quarter financial report? Would that be our next meeting? No, it would be the April one.
It would be the first meeting in April.
Okay. So this is just something we want to keep in mind. How can we get something in front of the council so that they understand how our finances are tracking a little more frequently, a little more regularly, and also the public in a format that's digestible. And I think we've got a good start with the regular quarterly reports that Ruth puts together. And we talked last time about maybe some tweaks where we break out things by category, like wages versus supplies. So I think on that topic, I just want us to think through what are those other breakouts that we might want to look at? And then what are the hierarchies that we want to look at? Do we want to look at things town versus school? And public safety versus public works versus the planning department? What's the granularity that we want to have access to and provide access to the public? And I think it'll be a topic of discussion.
Yeah. I think a way to consider approaching that is perhaps us considering like asking ourselves the questions that we think we want to understand in the financial reporting and creating that list. And then, because I started doing that for myself, and then I was comparing it to what Ruth had, and I was like, okay, she's answering like 90% of my questions, but then there's like some other questions that I have. And I think, John, Betsy, if we can kind of align on what are those questions we want to be able to answer simply, easily, and prioritize them, I think that's one way we can kind of help identify maybe some gaps that we want to close. And then the other thing I think was just, and again, this was for me for the first time consuming this, and I really appreciate Ruth, you walking me through it, but there are some things from like a maybe like a formatting perspective that I think also might make it easier for people to kind of view these and understand what's important that we might want to talk about too. So there's kind of like, what do we want to get away from it? And then how can we better present the information so that it's easy to digest and understand what are some of the key things, key takeaways from the charts that we have.
Great. Betsy, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple. I agree with what you said, John. But I'm trying to remember, there's something in policy or charter that we're supposed to review something by the end of January. That's not the town annual audit, is it? What?
It's actually the end of December.
End of
Okay.
December.
And is so so is that what you were saying? We're expecting in April, Ruth, or?
No, those are the quarterly reports for the period ending March
Okay.
31st, 2021.
So
The
do we
audit's
have-
still being worked on.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Tom, do you have an update on when the council can expect to see something on that?
I've actually been spending most of my time on the FY21 budget and the FY22 budget, so I haven't really touched the audit in the past couple of months. So it's, I don't really have a time frame. I'll be surprised if you have it by the end of March, to be honest with you. I feel really bad. I wish there was something else I could do, but it just hasn't been
Yeah, I
feasible.
think
for us
it's
to
just,
do.
getting an update, letting people know when it's coming out. That's the important thing. Yeah, so I guess mine was a process, John. I thought our 1 hour, one action workshop was quite effective. And then we came right back and we did a vote quickly and kind of turned something into action. I mean, I'm willing to do a workshop, or not willing, I'm happy or requesting, or however you want to say it, on one of these topics that we just discussed. I mean, I think give us ourselves a couple of weeks to do a little work, but, come back, maybe definitely not asking staff for much, that we do work ourselves, that we can give to them, that they can respond to at our next meeting or something. So I'm more than open to doing something like that. I thought that worked really well, and just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's a good idea, Betsy. I want to make sure that we're to a point where we can be productive with that discussion. And maybe we're close to that, actually. It sounds like we're fairly well aligned right now, particularly on the long-term planning one.
That might be the one to pick.
Yeah. Okay. Only 2 minutes left. This is going to be another awkward year in terms of reaching out to the public to engage or solicit feedback on the budget. And I just wanted us to think or start thinking through how we might get creative, or I want people to be engaged. And we're not going to be having budget outreach meetings and the different firehouses. So what can we do? Is it within our purview, or is that something communication should drive? I don't have any great thoughts or answers, actually. I thought we should cover it.
We talked about that at communications of whether we play a role or not. And I think we kind of, I'm going to say we kind of said no, but not exactly no. But maybe one thing that would be helpful, and I don't know, Tom and Liam, if Allison's already been kind of charged with this, but I'm assuming she's probably thinking like communications around the budget. It would be good at some point to get an understanding of what she's thinking, if anything, about how we want to promote, bring awareness, and those types of things, and maybe bring that either to communications or to the finance committee to kind of just share what the current plan is. And then we could then, John, provide some feedback or insight or other things we might want to do to adjust that plan for things that either the council wants to do specifically, or just other learnings that we might have had from past experiences that we'd like to see included in that communications approach.
Well, last year we met with BOE Communications Group, and it was incredibly productive meeting. We had Larissa there, and we just pounded out in that meeting what everybody was going to do. And then I don't know, BOE communications team last year, you could just kind of put people to shame. They just kind of come up with ideas. They mark them up right on the screen as you're working. We had an action list. I think one of them went off and did a communication. Larissa gave us dates that we could get into the leader. We had, thanks to Ken, we have more spots for that kind of thing. But we just, really time is running short. It sounds like we have a long time, but for my 1 year in council, I'm not an expert, but I realize how short budget season really is because there's so much to do. And then all at once you go, oh, wait a minute, we haven't engaged the public. We've been meeting for weeks. We've been talking and nobody, so I don't know. I thought that worked great to meet with BOE communications group. I'm not on communications this year, but they just, you could probably look at what we did last year and they came up with a plan. And the important part was we put target dates on each one, because if you miss a target date, it's an opportunity that you miss to communicate out through some particular format or something like that. I think we did a couple of newsletters, and I'm not saying it was the be all end all. I think for me personally, and I have brought this up, and I don't want to sound overly harsh or whatever, but I just hope this year, especially with Allison and all the great work that's been being done on the website, that we could really focus on the budget portal. I don't think we could last year. We didn't have the tools in place. Last year was a crazy year. There was a few things on the budget portal. They were really hard to see. I had to email Larissa, like, where is it? She's like, oh, you got to scroll down and there it is, click this thing at the bottom of the scrolling. And I think we can do a lot better this year, I hope. And then that is a key piece of communication to me, to be able to point people to the budget portal, because I think our goal last year was to actually, if we had a joint communications meeting, actually post a link, BOE and if our two committees met, post that link under the portal. Here's all the things that went on. Here's Tom's presentations. Here's, and then we could instead of saying, always trying to craft a message, be pointing people back to the budget portal where they can dig through on their own, not, beyond the budget. So I'm not saying we have the resources or staff, but that would be my hope this year.
So maybe Betsy, because Ken is trying to get a joint communications meeting with the school board. It might already be scheduled. I forget when, but maybe to your point, maybe the starting point is let's pull the plan from last year, revisit it, and see, what kind of tweaks or changes we want to make. And then again, I don't know Allison, what Allison's being charged with from a communications perspective around this, but probably pull her into that and make sure we have some alignment. And then I think we could bring that back to this group to say, here's what we're thinking, or here's what the plan is looking to be, and get feedback.
So we did some videos, and I think the BOE was going to do some with us, and they ended up pulling out. I don't remember the exact details, but I know that I did one on mill rate, and anyway, we made some videos. We did have an intern last year who helped out with a number of these factors. I apologize, I can't remember her name, but she was great. She did a great job. But I know it all takes time, but
So I'm hearing two sides to this. One, I can reach out to Ken and say, hey, you should meet with the BOE or come up with a plan for communicating around the budget. And then maybe from a finance committee perspective, let's take a look at the budget portal and see, if there's some low hanging fruit there for how we can make things a little easier or better. Go ahead, Liam.
Yeah, so I think John Anderson's going to be a key to this because I believe you're the liaison to the Board of Education in addition to sitting on both of these committees. So I see you as being the conduit from a council standpoint. Allison's ready to react to whatever we want to charge her with. She already has dates on the agenda. She's familiar with the Finance Committee's budget calendar. So we'll be working on, and she's keenly aware of the interest in the community of the budget process. So I will she's expecting to roll out regular updates on social media, in the newsletter with updates, and as well as utilizing the leader places or columns for updates, which again, I think will come from the Finance Committee, again, probably in coordination with the Communications Committee. So to Betsy's hope, I think that we're really ready to do an improved job on outreach this year, even with the virtual environment. But I think that comment about getting some coordination with the BOE on the budget timeline process is
Mhm.
heard, and I think that there's probably already efforts underway to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
I'll then,
always surprised how many times like we'd say, oh, we're gonna have this meeting, and then they're like, oh, we have to change our meeting date because we have to meet before you guys do that. So it's like, oh, I didn't, they actually queue off a lot of what we do. So
I'll take the action then to start the process to engage the communications committee, reach out to Allison, talk to Sarah. Liam's right. Like I'm probably best suited to kind of drive it. And so I'll take that and get back to you guys on what the plan is.
yeah, that
Good
meeting
nice.
was highly productive. It was a great meeting that we did last year.
And right now, John, you're the center of my screen, so I think it's very appropriate that you're going to be the center of this action.
Tom, go ahead.
I just want to reflect a report that the budget portal has been kind of refreshed and reformatted, so it is ready to start receiving new information. Keep in mind, Allison hasn't gone through a budget cycle, so I think she's very willing and capable to kind of to rise to the occasion. But some of this stuff won't be intuitive necessarily, just because it's kind of unique and you got to go through it once. And just for all of our expectations. Maybe for John Anderson in particular, there's a lot to report up front with the proposed budget, and we can certainly communicate around the process and the timeline and ways for folks to interject themselves into the process if they wish. But once I present the budget, there's probably 6 or 7 weeks of not much reporting out because the council's in discussion and there's really kind of no new updates. I mean, there may be some things staff prepares, but a lot of it is, quality time among all of you reviewing the budget and having discussions. So how you fill those intervening weeks and months, I think there's opportunity there. And in the past, there's been some really creative ideas. Counselors tape videos talking about kind of budget terms and kind of an educational piece that's not particularly on the specifics of the FY22 budget, but they're all kind of related to a glossary of terms. So we stand ready, willing, and able to assist and support for sure.
I will toss out there though that the profile on the public works employees that was in the newsletter and maybe in the newspaper, I find that extremely helpful. You can kind of, I guess, feel and touch what people are doing when you put stuff like that out. And I think that's part of budget outreach right there, is just, showing there's people behind the numbers and this is what they do.
That's the most recent example of kind of the value added that Allison brings. That's entirely her doing.
And
Yeah, I shared that out and I got a lot of people who liked it, just like didn't even know, they don't even live in our town and they really liked that.
I mean, did you know that we had a Lulu that turns wrenches? That's one of our star performers in vehicle maintenance? I suspect not, right?
so
Yeah, I was looking at, like another town and departments, update like kind of what they're working on, and they just put it in a monthly report. We put in 2 new boilers, that's not a newsletter type thing, but there's value in people understanding everything that goes on, not everything, but the breadth and width of what it takes to run a town.
I definitely think that was one of the hopes and visions for this additional position, was trying to put faces to again, we'll hear a lot, we'll talk a lot about the costs of our staff and personnel and the services they provide, but I think really providing that personal component was always a hope for what Allison in that position would bring, and she's done a phenomenal job with it. So very happy with that.
Good work. So I know you guys need 20 minutes before your next meeting. If there's nothing else, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Dinner's overrated. So,
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much.
Colette, we might as well vote on it.
Yes,
Alright.
you
No, I was about to hit leave. I'll keep going.
No, you can't. All right.
Leave button
Counselor
highlighted.
Counselor
It takes you 20
Gleisteen.
minutes to find the other link.
Counselor Gleisteen. Counselor Gleisteen.
Yes.
Counselor Anderson.
Yes.
Counselor Clucci.
Yes.
Motion
Yes.
passes.
Thank you.